Let's move on this 6th International Conference at OAFI from Barcelona, but streaming through YouTube globally. So we're having the next speaker on, and this will be online. Good morning, Marc. We've always said that rheumatic conditions, disabilities, dependencies, patients with osteojoint condition, and please, if you can keep it a bit quieter so that we can continue. Well, I was saying that disability and dependency for patients with osteojoint condition. Well, there is the Spanish Council for the Support of Disabled People, and Marc Subirón is their legal advisor, their legal expert, and he's with us to tell us what's their work and to tell us about some of the solutions that they may be considering. Round of applause for him. Thank you. Marc, I think you have prepared the presentation for us. Yes, indeed. And thank you very much for this warm welcome. Before moving on to my presentation, let me say that I'm indeed here representing the Spanish Council for the Support of People with Disability, which is a non-profit Spanish organization whose mission is to support the rights for a better quality of life on people with a disability. In our association, we are not only representing these people, their relatives, and the associations representing them, but we also try to incorporate more cross-cutting scope of talent into this struggle. So we try to cover this from cradle to grave, from the very birth until the death of a person, and we provide for residencies, we provide for support in the case of social benefits. And one of the things that I'm really happy to be here is to try and contribute and to build proposals for the politicians, for the decision makers, in order to have a better quality of life for people with a disability or that might be facing a situation of dependency. So, without further ado, let me share my screen. Hopefully you can see it. So, this presentation is disability and dependency on patients with osteojoint pathology, because we've been working for long with OAFI, and we would like to thank them and Dr. Vergés for inviting us to participate, and congratulations on this wonderful congress. So we try to provide tools to both the scientific community and the patients on these osteojoint or osteoarticular conditions, and we'll be talking about some of the terms in here that could provide us with more tools for these patients. First of all, one thing we like doing at first is to clarify some notions that, even though might converge in some areas, are just totally different. We have often heard about the notion of a disability. Well, disability can be seen in two areas: in the working area or in the civil area. A working disability, well, a working non-capacity or non-ability, or inability rather, would mean the loss of ability in order to be able to perform your job. Could be temporary or a permanent non-ability and inability, but people with a disability does not mean that they are unable to work. It doesn't mean that there is an inability to work. There must be a verdict or by the specific managing authority. And then you have the civil inability, the possibility for the individual to participate in the most important legal actions in their livings, or otherwise they will be requiring some support when signing legal agreements or when making decisions in their own lives. And then we have the disability and the dependence, which is what we will be talking about more today. And more specifically, we will try and contribute some comments on the osteojoint pathology. Here are the points of my presentation, what's the meaning of a disability, and then osteojoint pathologies and disability, the benefits and rights in having a disability certificate, on why having such a recognition it is important and valuable, and then finally some notes on dependency. Then, disability. And of course we need to look into the Spanish regulation. We have the law in 2013, the law on disability, which replaces the law on the social integration of the handicapped, and this merges several pieces of regulation in the field of disability, and through a new naming it provides a better fitting into the Convention of Rights according to the UN. This stems from the interaction between people with permanent disabilities and any barriers that may prevent them from effectively participating in the society with equal conditions. This definition, of course, as burdensome as it must be, being a piece of regulation, has three elements, three significant elements worth highlighting. First, this deficiency, because if we are talking about a bodily deficiency that might be diagnosed, but that deficiency on its own does not mean it's a disability. Furthermore, you need to correlate that with a limitation in your activity, and by that it means in your daily activities, be it social interaction, be it your commuting, be it your walking around, be it your daily activities. And as a consequence of these two, you will face a limitation, and even in the most serious cases, something that will prevent you from participating in the social life like any normal citizen would. This situation leads us into viewing disability as a complex social phenomenon where, by means of this diagnosis and this medical analysis, you will add some psychological features that will recognize this situation so that we can promote the means and the supporting measures required in order to make up for this disability in the social environment. Roughly speaking, when talking about disability, this encompasses several conditions, several pathologies. When we're talking about disability, mostly in this social arena, is not seen as a pathology, even though there might be a medical pathology that would cause it. But we call these as a status, being a permanent situation. Even though, as sad as it may sound, they will not heal, but rather they will coexist, often with a very good quality of life with that condition. So there is a significant array of disabilities that I've tried to cluster here according to the International Classification on Disabilities and Health on 5 main groups, which are then broken down into others. First, on physical disabilities, as indicated by its very name, these refer to 2 mostly, functional and organic. Functional is related to any bodily changes that might have an impact on the neuromuscle system, the skeleton system, preventing it from a proper walking and movement. And this is where you would find the osteojoint pathologies, which might be considered a disability when in advanced situation. Also hemiplegias, cerebral palsy, any sort of spine injuries, and so on. Then mental disabilities, the ones that would refer to physiological or inner organs, such as lungs, kidneys, and so on. And then we have the mental one, where you can distinguish between the psychic and the intellectual. Mental would be the adaptive conditions when in decision making that the individual cannot undertake because of behavioral disorder. It could be COD or schizophrenia or anyone related to mental health. And then the intellectual one, which refers to the ability by our intellect on making decisions which would be rated lower when compared to the standards. And then we have the sensorial, where you have the senses affected, be it blindness, low sight, or hearing, touch, scent, or smell or touch, sorry. And we will try to look more in depth on the physical one and then on what might be the advantages for this. But then, who and how is recognizing people with a disability? Is it a doctor? Well, it's not only. This is something, a power that's been devolved to the Spanish region, to the Spanish regions, and it's done by some technical staff made up not only of doctors but also of therapists and social workers, because we want for this not only to be an objective and rigorous diagnosis so that we can understand the situation of that person, but we also need to incorporate the social aspects such as the age, the family environment, the labor condition, the educational levels, and so on, so that would enable us to complement the percentage of disability that will be assigned to an individual. And it is starting at 33%, where you have this legal recognition. And here, which is the criterion, because they need to be using the same set of criteria. Well, this is based on the law in 1999, with the recognition, statement, and assessment of the disability degree. And just recently, as a matter of fact, last week, this was updated by a new law updating this classification. Of course, we have our professionals that have been working on this law, but since our experts are now reviewing the new one, I will still be referring to the old one, and later on, and that's up to Dr. Vergés to bear that in mind, to look into the new changes brought by the law to see what's the impact. Anyway, this Spanish law, based on the disabilities that I was telling you before, attaches a percentage of disability to a given injury and then by means of some corrective factors or by means of some social criteria which will later give you a percentage. These may later be reviewed in case of an improvement or in case of a worsening of the disability, and so you need to wait for 2 years until there is some blatant error that's been detected. And in all this process, in the request by the patient, once the patient is facing such a situation, they will eventually get that final assessment. On the osteojoint pathology and disabilities, let me apologize beforehand because I'm sure I will not be as technically precise as you could be, and at the end of the day, the medical technical advice is done by experts we have here at the council, and myself can only provide a more general overview of the whole procedure from a legal viewpoint and a procedural viewpoint. As you probably know much better than myself, in the osteojoint condition there is a limitation or a loss of movement in the joint system by deterioration of the cartilages, which often is reflected in secondary weakness in the joints. In order to assess the disability, when you go to an assessment unit, such as the ones I was mentioning before, the truth is that an X-ray scan is the most usual method in order to determine the amplitude, the breadth of the movement. And here, the Spanish law takes much into consideration the joint space to determine a percentage of deficiency. This percentage of deficiency, and I will give you an example here, and this is but one of the many charts that you can find in the Spanish law, by the way, where you can see the different body parts, here the lower limbs, but based on the intervals in millimeters, certain percentages are allocated. And then pain and weakness is compensated through other total values which are added to the percentage of disability. In the case of OA, it's dependent on several areas, depending on the site where the condition is manifested or whether there are several. There is a specific one, or a specific rating, one might say, for hip arthritis, as you can see for chapter 2. And here, the involvement for lower limbs in the movement arcs, then shoulder arthritis with a maximum percentage in isolation by 49%, considering the deficiency in movement on that shoulder. Then we can have arthritis in elbows or wrists, and here we will be looking mostly into the flexion and extension of both, and as well as the movements. Then on knee and ankle, we'll be looking on the likely ankylosis, if there is such, and the limitation in the movement in order to determine the percentage of deficiency for that limb, and if there were several involved globally. Funny fact is that regarding arthritis on hands and feet, I was told by the assessors that there is no set of hands or feet, but rather the focus is on the fingers or toes. So, both on the loss of sensitivity and in the loss in motion.
Although these deficiency values are found in the finger, they encompass hands and feet. And then we've got spinal osteoarthritis, where flexion, rotation, and similar are the most relevant aspects we will need to consider when assigning this percentage. Obviously, in order for us to be able to determine a high percentage, the next one will be an advanced level or degree, where there is this limitation of the joint. And then we reach the core of my presentation, the disability certificate. We said that following this process and this assessment, if for these deficiencies we obtain a percentage equal or above 33%, we will be legally considered as a person with a disability. This is recognized by each regional autonomous community, and it is important to say that it not only is a certificate, it also comes with cards. Here you can see the card for Madrid and the one for the Generalitat government of Catalonia, which are equivalent documents and certify the disability of the person. Why should we go through this whole process? Well, a disability certificate is a public benefit. It is true that there is a dispersion of regulations in the various laws and the various areas, such as those we can see here, and it also depends on the regional autonomy or the state, that sometimes put hurdles of in the exercise of rights. But based on this recognition, the person, in addition to being accompanied and being provided with medical, therapeutical, and other prevention recommendations, the person will be able to exercise all social, public, and other mechanisms facilitating their social integration. So by and large, we see tax benefits, reducing the tax base on income tax, reductions and discounts on VAT for certain products, healthcare, orthopedic products at 4%. Also important exemptions when it comes to donations and protected assets. And in the educational field, there's special seats reserved at universities, special grants for students with a disability granted by each autonomous community, and also all the necessary adaptations in classrooms up to the end of compulsory education or further training. Now, I would like to highlight social provisions. In this case, social benefits are the large invalidity provision that should not be mistaken with a non-contribution validity certificate or other benefit. So after a certain degree, a high degree of disability, I think it's 85%, and according to the economic capacity of the person, he or she will be able to be assigned a minimum compensation to meet very basic needs in terms of those resulting from their disability. Then there are other benefits for child under their care, some expansions in the case of being a single parent or losing a partner. And then in transport, there are various discounts for public transport. For instance, in the railway network, there's the so-called golden card. You will know it because pensioners benefit from it already, but people with a disability are also eligible to obtain it. They can benefit from these discounts. Some can acquire vehicles. There's a reduced VAT for the purchase of vehicles, also an exemption in the registration of the vehicle. When it comes to plane tickets, there are services in airports to facilitate movement in large infrastructure. So there are members of staff who accompany the person with a disability. especially in the case of affections of joints when there's reduced mobility. Use of electric vehicles or wheelchairs can be made available. And lastly, employment. People with a disability have access to incentives to be hired. There's 2% of employees with a disability in large companies, and there are other mechanisms such as protected employment or the reservation of jobs in the public administration. Lastly, balance between family and employment life. I have a relative with a disability, so I can ask for a reduction of working hours if they are under my care. I can extend certain permits if I have someone under my care, or I can even request for a benefit if I would have a child with a serious illness, disease, or affected by cancer. Lastly, and I'll conclude with this slide. I wouldn't like to use too much of your time. I know you have a very long day ahead. So, on screen, I would like to highlight the term dependency. Although it is related to disability, it is not the same. The Dependency Act is governed by Act 39-2006, the wrongly coined Dependency Act, because this is the act promoting personal independence and caring for people with disability. This act tried to improve, in terms of social services, the aging of the population, especially those for whom basic services, usual services, fell short or were far from the care that this group of the population needed, depending on, let's say, the lack of autonomy, of the long disease, disability, or situation. This is a definition given by the law. A permanent state for those people who, as a result of their age, disability, or disease, there are other factors, not just disability, and linked to the lack of autonomy, physical, mental, intellectual, or sensorial, require the attention or care of other people or important assistance to carry out their basic activities in daily life. So as we did this with disability in the past, I would like to highlight two important elements. The first one is the basic activities of daily life. What are these basic activities? Well, the most fundamental, the most basic ones. Getting dressed, getting showered, eat, control of sphincters, minimal movement, sexual intercourse. So, when, as a result of these factors, one person cannot perform these activities of daily life, so in this situation, depending on another of the fundamental elements to comply with this recognition, with this situation, will be the lack of autonomy or the need for support to conduct these basic activities. So are all people with a disability dependent? No, by no means. Most are not. In general, a person with a disability will not be a dependent person, not because we want to give them independency or autonomy, but rather because of a logical supposition made by law. It is not until it is requested that it won't be recognized in this character. The Dependency Act, as you know, it is a power resulting or referred to the autonomous communities, and basically it tries by means of two mechanisms such as services, day centers, telecare, resident health, or by means of financial contributions or benefits when you live in parts of the national territory when these services cannot be given, a compensation will be given. They try to provide this support and this care for the person in need or in a situation of dependency. situation, people with joint problems will find things more difficult because this will have to be associated with another pathology so that we can actually determine that absolute or large loss of autonomy that would result in an entitlement to all of the services and recognition of dependency. So that would be all from me. Thank you very much for your attention. I know that these legal presentations tend to be tedious, that is, understanding the various regulations, but we also believe we need to give a very important message along with the scientific community on this more social aspect. Because those people suffering these pathologies must be looked after, accompanied, and that's why all public bodies of defense, of provisions, of incentives should be known with informed attitude to guarantee the best possible quality of life. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Marc. Fantastic presentation, Marc. We have an amazing document there that we can check at any time at the website of the Spanish Council for the Defense of Disability and on the website of OAFI too, where we'll be posting it. I believe there are some questions or comments regarding what Marc said. Yes, José Luis? Hi, Marc. This is José Luis. Thank you very much. I would like to share with the auditorium that you are living in Barcelona and that your intention was to come here. And there was, the problem with the lift at this venue prevented you from being here with us. Thank you for being so flexible, for being here, but remotely. Thank you for your understanding too. Secondly, I would also like to thank you for personalizing your presentation in relation to joint health. Some patients do not resort to the processing of their possible disability, and it's perfectly feasible for many of us. And lastly, I would like to mention something to the broader auditorium, which is the recent agreement signed on joint cooperation between OAFI, ECOSAR, and your organization. This will allow us to receive your counseling and your specialized support on this matter. I just wanted to make it public so that OAFI patients and ECOSAR patients know about it, and through us, they can reach you. Thank you very much once again, Marc. Okay, I'll see you soon, Marc. Bye-bye.